To commemorate this day, today we turn our attention to access to education as a right. Former Fees Must Fall activist Mcebo Dlamini joins us now to talk about this. You can also be a part of this conversation, by the way, by tagging us on Newzroom 405. That's the handle. Or otherwise, WhatsApp us your questions and your comments to 072-110-5584. The question we're asking, what does it mean as we commemorate Human Rights Day today that poor students in the country are still not able to afford the education they need to enable themselves to pull themselves out of the poverty that they are in? We'll get your thoughts in a moment and get to your views. Mcebo, good evening and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening to you, my brother, and good evening to the listeners at home.
What does it mean, 27 years on, that we are having a conversation on Human Rights Day that says, what does a student who lives in a poor environment, in squalor, do to afford education they need to enable to pull themselves out of poverty?
Well, look, the truth is that it is very difficult for a lot of people to celebrate the Human Rights Day because it really doesn't have a meaning to them. Indeed, there are laws put in place speaking about restoring the dignity of a black child. Now, even the Constitution itself, it speaks about the access to education. But it is vague in that it doesn't speak what is education. That's why now South Africa will say, no, there's free education in the public schools. But it doesn't speak about free education at tertiary level. Now, it then says that human rights are not universal. We can't speak of human rights and in the same line as them as being universal. Human rights have color. When they come, they are human rights as documented. When they approach, they look at the color of the person and then wave. Because you will remember that even during apartheid, the UN and human rights were there. But our black people were slaughtered all over South Africa here. Now, it then says the human rights is for the white people. It seeks to protect white minority interests in the expense of the black majority. It is then difficult for someone who comes in the deep rural areas of Nongoma, Msinga, to then relate to the documents because they don't even know it. Yeah. There is conflict between culture and the Constitution.
Right.
There's never been an initiative to harmonize customary law, custom and the Constitution.
Yeah. Now you talk of laws that are in place. I mean, there are many conventions that we can talk about globally, even including the European Union courts, recognizing education as a human right. Why is it, as you put it, they will tell you that, well, education in our public school is actually free. Why is it that there is wide acceptance of education as a human right at lower levels of education, but there seems to be difficulty with understanding that even at higher education, it still remains a human right and more than a privilege?
Now, remember that as South Africa, we come from a colonization of a special time, where the black people were put in the periphery and they were very much inferior. The white people were the superior race. We are still there. The human rights came as a result of the suppression and segregation and torture and inhuman acts by the apartheid government. Then they put the human rights so that the black people cannot do what they did to them, not that it came to assist the blacks to achieve and develop to the same level as the white people. Currently, we have, someone will say, but we have a black government. Then the question that I will bring is that is the black government in power or it is in office? Who is pulling the strings? Who is being protected by the law? Now, in South Africa also, we have a problem that we have two states. We have rich states and we have poor people. You have Alexandra and you have Senti, and that has been accepted. The education that is being provided at the township schools is not at the same level as the private schools, your St. Mary's, your St. John's, all the schools where the children of the who is at, and where the children of the people who are responsible for restoring the dignity of black people are. They will never restore those dignities because it doesn't affect them. The most painful thing is that our children will be made of the children of the politicians.
Was the decision made in 2017 by President Jacob Zuma when he announced free education, when he knew fully well that South Africa was not able to meet that obligation fully as per the country's finances? Was it a populist decision? The decision. I'm not talking about whether it is populist to want to fund free education, but I'm talking about the decision itself.
Now, as students, especially at VET, when we were protesting in 2015, we then began to answer to certain questions that were posed by government and the public. Is it feasible for us to roll out free education? We submitted a document, a feasibility study, and it was proven that it was feasible. We passed the stage of saying, is it feasible? They then brought another question to say, how are we going to fund this thing? Then we put a team of lecturers and academics to say, which came with them a free education model, how it was going to be funded. It was even tabled in Parliament. What Jacob Zuma did was what was relevant and what was proven to be sustainable. Pravin Gordhan was part of the team that we submitted the model to. Now, it then shocks me that today the issue of free education is a Zuma problem. A Zuma that was an ANC president, an ANC that is in government today. Blade Nzimande was a minister then, he is a minister now. Whether Zuma was a populist or not, populism is part of politics, and politics is all about that. And politics is all about spectacle, as long as the spectacle is for the people.
Yeah.
In 2018, free education was there. Students registered without a registration fee. Previous steps were scrapped. In 2019, we began, when Naledi Pondo was removed and Blade brought back, we began to see the gains being reversed. So now it then says the problem is with the Ministry of Education, not Zuma, not the feasibility of the rollout.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that cost proposal when we come back. We'll continue with Mcebo Dlamini, former Fees Must Fall activist here on the news feed late night. Get your thoughts on this at Newzroom 405-072-110-5584 on WhatsApp. Your comments and your questions. Stay with us. Hey, Yasmin.
Hi.
How are you doing?
Well, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to wrap up with Mcebo and come to you in a moment.
Okay.
Dlamini sisakhona, you still there, ne?
Ngikhona ngindzawo.
All right, sharp. Happening now, you're live on the news feed late night, and in conversation tonight with the former Fees Must Fall activist Mcebo Dlamini. We'll come to you as well and get your views as we take this focus today on human rights. But the angle we are looking, of course, at is that of free education as a human right. Mcebo Dlamini moments ago talking about the proposal that they put on the table, the cost proposal, which they believe was feasible, and they had overcome the feasibility constraint into saying how is it going to be implemented. Now, it seems though when we are talking about this particular issue today of the cost proposal, it seems the implication right now, which they are putting forward, is that spending more money on free education would either mean additional borrowing, which in itself will mean we'll be spending more money repaying debt, and that in turn is going to take away from key services that are required in society, such as your social spending, but also money that should be put towards economic development. What do you say to that? I don't know if you got me there. Are you still there? Oh, we seem to have lost Mcebo. They're on the line. Mcebo Dlamini, former Fees Must Fall activist, trying to wrap up that conversation there with him on what exactly should be done now. How do we do this in a way that balances economic growth, smaller fiscal deficit, and meet the increase in the social demands as well at the same time? Meanwhile, President Cyril Ramaphosa has called on the country to celebrate how far we've come when it comes to human rights. He made the comments during Human Rights Day celebrations in honor of the 69 black South Africans killed by the apartheid police. The Sharpeville massacre took place on this day in 1960.
61 years ago, our brave forebears took up this defense of their rights in the face of a harsh, cruel, and unjust system that was oppressive and exploitative. The heroes who protested at Sharpeville on the 21st of March 1960 took up the cause of liberty, freedom, and human rights. They did so not for themselves alone, but for all of us, and that is why they are our heroes and heroines. In the same way, the struggles we wage today are not for our cause alone. They are also for the men, women, and children of tomorrow, so that they too may live in security, comfort, peace, and freedom. In reflecting on the events at Sharpeville, we appreciate how far we have come from being a society that cares only for the few at the expense of the majority.
All right, the President earlier on addressing, of course, the commemoration on human rights. Let's get back to our conversation. Mcebo with us there on the line again. So Mcebo, before we were cut, I was saying to you, when you look at the cost proposal now, it seems the argument is that if we are to fund free education going forward, the option is either we go and borrow more, which in itself will mean we'll be paying more money servicing debt, because South Africa's debt repayments are the fastest growing expenditure item right now on the budget, which in turn will jeopardize other key services such as social spending and funding the economic recovery plan. What's your take on that?
Well, my brother, let me assist here. It seems like we are being led by people who don't have an idea of the sector that they are entrusted to lead. Now, it then says to me that our leaders still suffer from colonization mentality, perpetually borrowing, We provided a mechanism on how government can fund free education. The money is there. The problem is lack of will. The problem is corruption. The problem is priority. You are going to have a problem with a country that doesn't prioritize its youth. You are going to have a problem that a country that doesn't prioritize education. When other countries are improving, we remain behind and still blame apartheid after 27 years. Now, when they bring all these things that they are talking about, they are not bringing figures and numbers. How many students are in those universities? How many students are international students? How many students can afford to pay for themselves? When we speak of a free education, we speak of those who are already on NSFAS. I doubt that they even know how many are those students in NSFAS. They just speak to defend themselves. There is no political will. Now, you can't, in 2019, there was a budget of 20 billion. Are you telling me that the 20 billion is gone? To where? Because universities are saying they are being owed. There is a lot that is going on here. Probably we will need a commission on NSFAS and the Ministry of Education, because there are a lot of gross irregularities there and looting and theft of the highest order.
Yeah.
There is money in South Africa and it must be directed to education. But remember, in summary, when you want to control the masses and cling into power, you deprive them education. You make them stupid. You make them poor. That's where we are today.
Yeah.
These old people have produced a bunch of hungry youths that must dance for supper that they have put in their pocket so that we don't shake the status quo.
So talking about shaking the status quo, now there are those who, for example, you raise the issue of corruption, right? Who, like you, believe that if we can deal with corruption in the country, actually we can be able to fund free higher education. The question then is, where does this corruption exist? Corruption exists in government. In most instances, it exists in our SOEs, maladministration, a lot of corruption that is there. Should government dispose of some SOEs, and would that, in a sense, be able to assist us, particularly with issues like guarantees that government has got to sign and the whole lot of money that is being thrown in what others are saying is just a deep black hole?
Well, my brother, these SOEs are not collapsing by mistake. These SOEs are collapsing by design. They are people who intentionally make sure that these SOEs are dysfunctional so that they are sold. I don't support privatization of SOEs. And now we have people, even when you look at SAA, they say now they've put someone there to look at these things, but he's busy selling these things already. Now, that's the problem that we have. We have our leaders being controlled by a capitalist. The corruption is on our comrades, but the corruption, we remove the corrupt comrade, we put another one, even the other one becomes corrupt. It then says the problem is deeper than what we see in the surface. When we talk about the corrupt, we must begin to say, who is corrupting our comrades? Then we deal with these people who are strategically corrupting our comrades, because we will perpetually fail as black people when we are put in position of power. Look at the CEOs and all the black professionals. They live under a cloud, but those who corrupt them continue to corrupt the next one who will sprout.
Yeah. So now one would say, well, what is Mcebo then saying we ought to do here? How do we get it right? You're saying we shouldn't borrow. You're saying we should not dispose of our SOEs. What is the next option? How do we do this in a way that balances economic growth, a smaller fiscal deficit, and we meet the increasing social demands in society?
Well, my brother, all that is needed here is a political will. All that is needed here is a vision. We need leaders who have a vision. We need leaders who are willing to leave a legacy. We need people who will touch lives. Now, we're still living in the legacy of the old. We still live on Mandela, Krizani, Sobukwe, Steve Biko. It then says there is a problem with the current crop because none of us see them as idols. That's where the problem is. There's nothing wrong with the SOEs. There's nothing wrong with South Africa. We had selfish, greedy people in positions of power. Leadership is a calling. It is not for everyone. But today, people will kill to be a leader. Back then, people will run away from leadership. In Siswati, because I speak Siswati, we say if you are put in position of power, ubulewe. Uma utata skundla, se ubulewe, you cease to exist. You then live for the people. We are where we are because we lack visionaries. It is time for young people to rise and take over. The generation of Mandela took over and gave South Africa a new life. We have ministers who were ministers in 1994. They are still ministers today. What new are they offering? What new have they to offer? The times have changed. We need young blood that has love for its people. For you to lead them, you must love them. For you to lead them, you must understand them. That's where we are today, and that's the biggest problem. When the ANC government took over power, they inherited a corrupt system that was never meant for black people. They inherited an apartheid system that was by design anti-black. They never tampered with the system. They took it as it is. They never tampered with the education system that was anti-black, preventing black people to study math and science and to study a Stellenbosch.
Right.
They took it as it is. That's why at some point we will call for decolonization instead of transformation.
Mcebo Dlamini, I appreciate you and thank you very much for joining us. Let's wrap it up with this note coming from Tabang, sent through WhatsApp. Tabang is in Randpark Ridge, saying Mcebo is correct that the dignity of the poor and marginalized rights are only protected on paper, while privilege is the crucial primary beneficiary of the rights in practice.